First of all, I would like to thank Joe Sanderson for his work as Treasurer this term, and I would like to call David Lee to take up the position for Michaelmas term.
Good luck.
I would like to thank Kiki Winter for her work as ENTS officer this term, and I would like to call Akila Jaffers to the position for Michaelmas term. For her work as executive officer, and I would like to call Austin Marler to the position for Michaelmas term. No. That is such a bad slip up. Thomas Keswick. Sorry. Shit. Officer, and I'd like to call Sophie Untitled to the position for Michaelmas term. Finally, I would like to step down as President and hand over to Callum MacDonald for Michaelmas term.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the Union's final debate of the year. To speak on the motion, this House believes no discrimination can be positive, it's a great pleasure to introduce your outgoing President, Rooster Term, who I think has done an absolutely fantastic job in putting on an incredible term, Francesca Hill.
Apologies to Thomas for what was an awful mistake. Before I start my speech, I'd like to say a few quick words about what an honour it's been to serve as your President this term. I remember visiting as a wide-eyed 17-year-old for part of the school's debating competition. Incidentally, I only made it a few rounds in, which doesn't bode too well for this evening, and never dreamed for a second that I'd have the pleasure of being responsible for what I still believe is a truly great institution. I cannot thank enough all those who have helped me during my time here. This society needs a constant influx of talent to be able to keep offering its members unique opportunities. I encourage you wholeheartedly to get involved, to vote in elections, and to stand in them yourselves. I've been privileged in working with a dedicated team of students and staff, and I believe that we continue to make great strides with the calibre of our speakers and the quality of our events. This is a wonderful place to be part of. It's tradition that a union president includes in their farewell speech a few jokes about the sex life of their successor. For various reasons, that would be fairly awkward. I had planned to skip that part completely, but my good friend Jan here has made it clear that if I don't, he will. And that's a fairly terrifying idea because Jan is anything but understated. So let's save everyone some time and a couple of us some blushes. We can fast forward through one kilt joke, easy access, way, and one joke about Callum liking his women on top. If I'm honest, there's really not much to say about the contents of Callum's boxes. So I'm instead going to focus on the fact that he's wearing them in the first place. Yes, I can exclusively reveal that Callum is a traitor to his manly, skirt-wearing ancestors. And for some reason, is not prepared to sit on a raised platform in front of 400 people without any underwear. Unbelievable.
I'm not really sure how to respond to that.
On a serious note, there is nobody in whose hands I'd feel more comfortable leaving the union. Over the past year, I've worked a lot with Callum as he stalked me obsessively from head of event management to executive officer to president, and if I had to pick anyone to have my back, this 6'2" Glaswegian is fairly high up the list. Callum, I wish you all the luck and success in the world. You really deserve it.
Thank you.
But let's move on to the main affair. The motion is, this House believes that no discrimination can be positive, and I'm going to tell you why in an applications procedure nobody deserves special treatment. Before I start, let's break with union tradition in actually defining the motion. Positive discrimination does not have to be favouring a weaker candidate from a minority group over a stronger candidate from a majority group. For me, it also encompasses so-called positive action, using an arbitrary characteristic to choose between two equal candidates. Positive discrimination is making a person's minority status the deciding factor in their selection, whether simply for a shortlist or for the actual job. Positive discrimination is special treatment in an attempt to correct an underlying social injustice and can address race, sex, social class, or sexual orientation. I'm going to outline my argument based on two main points. Firstly, positive discrimination in no way solves the underlying social injustice. And secondly, positive discrimination is more likely to exacerbate social prejudices than defeat them. So, point number one. I'm not going to say that social injustice doesn't still exist. I'm not going to say that there aren't far more male CEOs than female ones. I'm not going to say that there aren't far more public school kids in Russell Group universities than make statistical sense. I'm not going to say that Parliament wouldn't be a lot more representative with a few more black MPs. What I am going to say is that in 2011, if there are only a handful of women leading FTSE 100 companies, it's because the lifestyle is far from appealing. I'm going to say that if kids from East London aren't getting into Oxbridge, it's because the education system failed them long before they sat for interview. I'm going to say that if political parties made more of an effort to connect with young people from a wider range of backgrounds, maybe they'd have talent rising through their ranks from a wider range of backgrounds. Giving people from minorities special treatment doesn't mean that the underlying social problem disappears. It's painting over it. It's addressing the symptom rather than the cause. If you want to get women into boardrooms, offer more flexible hours so they can manage a career and a family. If you want to put more state school kids into good universities, increase funding for school education and don't put up tuition fees. If you want more black people in Parliament or more women, create an atmosphere where they can see themselves fitting in. Don't artificially implant them. If you have a test which is only regularly passed by white, privately educated males, either you're testing for the wrong things, or not enough people made it to the test in the first place. Sometimes it's even both. Let's take an example. A smaller proportion of state school candidates apply for top universities because they're intimidated by the great expected. And in many Oxbridge colleges, a smaller proportion of state applicants are offered places because they do less well in entrance tests and interviews. But that's fixable. Oxbridge could lower the grades demanded on their intimidating websites and run more of their own tests. Call me idealistic, but I find it hard to believe that in a town like Cambridge with some of the brightest minds in the country, there is nobody who can design an entrance test that you can't prepare for, that shows ability instead of knowledge or polish. Heck, they could even change the format every year so that private schools can't drill their candidates. It just requires a bit of effort, a bit of extra funding, an admission that things could be better. Don't focus on helping those with specific arbitrary characteristics. Create a system in which nobody will notice them. Positive discrimination will only exacerbate the prejudices which exist in our country. If a white male is beaten to a promotion by a woman from an ethnic background who he knows is more capable than him, in today's society, he is likely to be okay with it. If a white male is beaten to a promotion by a woman from an ethnic background who isn't any more qualified than him, but who happens to kind of meet a target for diversity that his office introduced last month, he's far more likely to be angry. He doesn't even have to be racist or misogynist. He just has to feel that he has been sidelined due to something he had no control over. And in the above situation, he would be right. It's a cliche, but two wrongs don't make a right. Trying to correct a historical failing with an opposite show of discrimination isn't just a second wrong, but it encourages a third wrong. Positive discrimination can help individuals who have suffered from prejudice. I won't deny that. But it doesn't improve the big picture. It doesn't help wider society. A society with an increasingly paranoid male white population has a problem. And a society where people from minorities wonder how many of their achievements can be attributed to special treatment is not one in which I want to live. I hate it when guys come up to me after a debate and talk about how my legs look instead of anything that I've said or done. I hate it when teachers who want to meet the president introduce themselves to the 14-year-old boy who happens to be standing next to me because they can't get their heads around the idea that the president might be a girl. Shit. I also hate the fact that middle-aged men are so fascinated by my ethnicity. So, where are you from? Bedford? No, I mean, where are you from? Oh, you mean ethnically? Prejudices still exist, and so does discrimination. Fundamentally, though, I can deal with that, because I wasn't helped into the job because it was time for a token girl or a token brown person. I'm here because the majority of voters thought I'd do the best job. Even 10 years ago, few people would have believed that the Cambridge Union would ever be anything other than predominantly white, male, Tory. If we've changed, so can any institution. People have congratulated me in the past on having such a multicultural team of officers. But the important thing is that it wasn't picked in order to tick boxes. It wasn't chosen so that we'd have like a Jew, a Surrey girl, 3 mixed-race kids of kind of varying combinations, or so that we'd have more women than men. That was just how it turned out. And I think that's when you're really winning, when you don't notice the labels in the first place. Positive discrimination addresses the symptom rather than the underlying cause, and only increases resentment towards minorities in our society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frankie. Now to open for the opposition, it's a pleasure to introduce Jan BOCK, who's a PhD student at Peterhouse, and formerly Senior Officer of the Union.
Woo!
We decided to go in order of height, so I'm the first one on the opposition. Dear Mr. President, congratulations. Ladies and gentlemen, I would also like to mention that Frankie has done a fantastic job as president, and that she, and I think that's the most important achievement, has managed to stay close to her friends and stay herself despite the pressures that this place can really put on people. And I'm sorry you're arguing on the wrong side tonight, but I would still like to say well done for a fantastic job. Now, the motion here tonight is this House believes that no discrimination can be positive, and I'd also like to start out by defining what I mean. Before jumping straight into the meaty issues, the pay gap, the institutional discrimination, racism, class divides, gender relations, and so forth, I'd like to also take a step back and ask, no, this House believes that no discrimination can be positive. What does this even mean? The Oxford English Dictionary says that discrimination is the action of discriminating, the perceiving, noting, or making a distinction or difference between things. Thus, for me, the motion, this House believes that no discrimination can be positive, means that no form of making any distinction and act accordingly can either in itself be advantageous or lead to beneficial results, that is, be positive. It means that no single type of distinguishing between people and things, that no form of acknowledging differences and acting can ever be positive. Sorry, I'm really tight. So. Is that a convincing statement? I believe not. Rather, I am certain that forms of discrimination can indeed lead to positive outcomes. and positive as a judgment agreed upon by a given social or political entity, because positivity is not an essential fact. It depends on how particular people define it under particular circumstances. Thus, if we and the opposition are successful in convincing you tonight that cases exist where the act of discriminating succeeds in the production of social facts that are advantageous or beneficial to particular individuals and or groups, then I am certain you will follow us in voting against the motion. The onus, I believe, is really on the proposition, because they have to show that there exists not a single case in which discrimination can be positive. We, however, on the opposition, could illustrate only one example of successful discrimination in the sense of having positive results, because then the motion should already be defeated. Its universalizing claim has been proven wrong. So if the proposition fails to convince you that not a single form of discriminating can be positive, then you should follow us and go through the nose door tonight. Now you might think that's just splitting hairs. But where, if not at Cambridge, can we sit back, think, and really unpack a statement, say it, phrase, and find out what it's really getting at? But there are, of course, more important matters. There's the media stuff that I'm getting at now. Because what people refer to generally when they speak about discrimination being positive is what Frankie did. They talk about positive discrimination or affirmative action. Those in favour of positive discrimination say that some groups, say white men, are more likely statistically to succeed in life, in education, career and salary. Thus, this form of discrimination positively addresses social imbalances. Of course, it's not just about women and ethnic minorities, but also many other social, cultural, religious and educational groups that suffer from institutional negative discrimination. The lack of access possibilities and the absence of a system that acknowledges difficulties, hard work and achievement. Now, what do the critics over there have to say against positive discrimination? They point to the example of having to choose per force, say, a woman over a man or a black over a white person, when both candidates have similar qualifications. They often argue that we already live in a meritocratic society where businesses and corporations should be allowed to make their own decisions on whom to employ, favour and promote. And no state or other form of mediator should get involved. Apparently this is the free market. It possesses a so-called self-regulatory function, and the same goes for school and university admissions and many other social factors. Well, pardon me, but I profoundly disagree. The idea of a meritocratic society is great, and I'm the first one to embrace it, but the fact of the matter is that we do not live in one. Power discrepancies, and the proposition so far has agreed with us. Inequalities, exploitation, domination, and hierarchies exist. Privilege manages to reproduce itself. Prejudice excludes the less advantaged from access to the mechanisms of control, and social injustice continues. If we accept this reality of power differences, relations of domination, and inequalities, then we as a social body can decide to challenge them. Let's say that we, society, determine that we want to pursue a dream of a truly fair, egalitarian and meritocratic society. If that is our goal, then we must address the relations of power that prevent this from becoming reality. If only for an intermittent period of time, a form of discrimination that grants those usually and actually disadvantaged access to mechanisms of political control must surely be positive, because we define it to be just that. Furthermore, when the proposition argues that we already live in a meritocratic society and don't need positive discrimination, they forget that meritocracy is in itself a form of discrimination, discrimination based on talent. And I'm sure that we can agree that this is a more positive way of discriminating. But let's be more concrete about this. Because here at Cambridge, there's a system of discrimination that operates, which I would call positive, namely all girls' colleges. We have Newnham and Murray Edwards, and they admit female students only. And I say this is certainly positive, as otherwise the Cambridge student gender ratio would be even more skewed in favour of male applicants than it already is. In 2010, 53% of admitted students were male and 47% were female. With all the all-girls colleges, it would be closer to 60 versus 40%. And I'm sure most of us, with the exception of some of my own college, I'm ashamed to say Peterhouse, will agree that men are not inherently more intelligent than women, or that they deserve more places at good universities. And we can probably also agree that admissions to institutions of higher education should be based on achievement. But an imbalance exists, and we should address it. Because I believe that mechanisms of institutional prejudice, which of course start operating well before university, are also at work here at Cambridge. They favour certain behaviour patterns, as well as particular ways of speaking, predominantly shown by boys in the admissions process. Also, most of Cambridge academics interviewing applicants are male themselves, which can help, especially so when they are led to believe, as the proposition, that men are increasingly the victims of obnoxious bigotry by women and feel the need to burn some briefs in protest. The same goes also for ethnic minorities, because the success rates for white or mixed white applicants are much higher than for other ethnic categories. In 2010, the average success rate for Cambridge applicants was 28%. However, for those classified as minorities, it was much lower. Black Caribbean, 7%. Black African, 11%. Indian, 20%. Pakistani, 18%. Bangladeshi, 12%. Whites had a success rate of 30%. This does not seem right, and especially so because it repeats year after year. Now, I agree, it is very hard to point one's finger to the causes of these things. Who discriminates here? Who makes the decisions that favour white men? Where does the problem lie? But institutional and systemic discrimination is very hard to pinpoint, but it exists, and I believe that we can address it. We do not live in a fair society, but if we want to change this, discrimination with the aim of positively balancing these trends, these dangerous trends, is, I believe, a sound initial mechanism. I believe, for example, that introducing a quota based on UK gender and ethnic proportions for Cambridge would be a positive development, because a university that prides itself on producing the elites of this country should aim at educating those who truly represent the diversity and variety of British society. I'm sure among all of them can be found clever, creative, and able enough people that can be admitted in a meritocratic system without lowering the academic standard, which is the alleged fear critics have about quotas or similar mechanisms of affirmative action. This does not lead to lower standards, but rather to a fairer representation. So differences, inequalities, and power hierarchies continue to exist in our modern societies. And if we agree that we would like to live in a more equal society, then forms of discrimination that bring us closer to the aim of equality and fair representation must surely be positive. Hopefully, these mechanisms will become redundant at some point when meritocracy reproduces itself, rather than privilege, background, and tradition, because it brings results. Nonetheless, and I would like to repeat here, even a meritocratic system is not a system without discrimination. Meritocracy functions through discriminating based on ability, intelligence, and maybe talent. And I believe that this is a form of discrimination that addresses other institutional inequalities, favoritism, and injustice. This is thus a form of discrimination that I believe we can agree to call positive. And if you support this analysis and the aims I have outlined, then please support us and vote against the motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jan. Now it's a pleasure to continue the proposition for the motion, Julie Meyer, who is one of the UK's most successful businesswomen, star of the online Dragon's Den, and CEO of Ariadne Capital.
And it's a pleasure to be with you this evening and to be speaking on the side of the position of this House believes that discrimination can be positive, because it happens to be the position that I feel very strongly about. You know, when I came to the United Kingdom to live and to work in 1998, I found to my surprise that people made all sorts of very positive assumptions about Americans. I thought how lovely this is. We were considered smart, hardworking, industrious. We were sure that we would be successful. All of these very nice things. I thought, how did this happen? If somebody had told me that this was going to be the general reaction to Americans in London, I would have come a long time ago. And then we got a new president, didn't we? We got a new president in 2000 who decided to go on all sorts of adventures. And regardless of what you may think about President Bush's adventures, all of a sudden I found that that halo effect of being an American in the United Kingdom was slipping away. And people were starting to make very negative assumptions about me. And I said, can we please go back to a couple of years ago? I liked all those very positive embraces and assumptions that I would always be successful and so forth. And I found myself going into situations where there was a big kind of elephant in the room, and I didn't like that elephant at all. The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that everything is relative. The assumptions that you make about people are based in things which are illusory, right? My success in the United Kingdom was neither because I was an American, nor because of George Bush, or because I'm tall, or because I'm blonde, or because my first boss in the country told me much later that he thought that it would be very nice to have somebody of my background on the team. What was I to make of that? Is that because my father was an entrepreneur? Is that because I was in marketing? Is that because I was American? Is that because I was interested in technology? Who knows, right? Who can decide what the discrimination was for me? The fact is that he just decided he wanted me. He wanted me to be on his team, and he said he thought that I had the right profile and so forth. So, I'm not sure really what discrimination is, but I do know that perception is important and everything is relative. The second thing, and I think this is quite an important point if you get to be the ripe old age of, well, the age that I am, you realize that life is a mental game. And I encourage you as you come out of your university years, because I didn't realize that actually when I graduated from university. It took me a very long time to realize that life is a mental game. It's all really played up here. You think that it's because of this or that, or where you went to school, or how hard you studied and so forth, and you realize as you encounter the real world that actually it's how well you play that mental game. And we all know people who have come from quote-unquote lesser backgrounds and who've done extraordinarily well. In the world of technology, investments in technology, software entrepreneurs and so forth, at least in this country, because that's where I've been over the past 13 years, we know a lot of people of so-called lower class backgrounds who've done extraordinarily well, become multimillionaires because they worked hard and the technology industry gave them that opportunity. Equally, because I deal with people who are investors and have lots of money and so forth, I know people who come from very wealthy families who have done absolutely nothing with the gifts that have been given to them. So to discriminate is really to take away the real achievement, which is for each one of us, is to be the master of what's been given to us wherever we start, and to make the most of that, and to use our gifts and to play that mental game very well. I was always struck by Andy Murray and his tennis game and so forth, because he always epitomized to me somebody who was trying very hard and very driven and really trying to play the mental game very, very well. So I don't think that there should be any free riders in society. I think that each one of us has been given certain strengths. That's what life is about, figuring out what your strengths are, molding that into an unfair advantage, where you feel that you can compete in the world, and you know what your unfair advantage is, and ultimately, once you get that sorted, your strengths and your unfair advantage, you start realizing that you probably have a unique contribution to make to the world, and you start focusing on really, really delivering that. And this whole thing about discrimination just takes your or my or anybody's eye off the fact that the real thing you do in life is figure out what your strengths are, what your unfair advantage is, and what that unique contribution is that you should be making to the world. And I don't believe that there should be any free riders. We shouldn't say that anybody, because they're poor, because they're wealthy, because they're Americans, because they're tall, because they're short, because they're blonde, because they're not blonde, should be able to get away without making that unique contribution to the world. Sorry, I apologize. It's usually me. It's usually me that happens to. If I'm really honest, there was a time in my 20s that I felt there was a discount associated with some of the things that I did. And when I was in business school, I remember sitting in the amphitheater at INSEAD, and I remember saying something in the class in business school, roughly 13 years ago, and kind of saying it half-heartedly and so forth. And then my colleague Charles said more or less the same thing, using my words. And the professor said, "Excellent point, Charles," and everybody kind of rallied around what Charles said, and I said, "Wait a second, I said that." And today, I wouldn't let Charles or anybody else get away with it. I said, "Excuse me, but I just said that. Thanks so much for endorsing my point of view." The point that I'm making is that I went from a period in my early 20s, late 20s even, where I felt that there was a discount associated with some of the things that I did. And at some point that flipped and became a premium. And I'll be damned if I really know when that happened, but I do know where it happened. It happened in my mind. It happened because I became convinced of those strengths, that unfair advantage. I got tired of Charles saying what Julie had said and getting credit for it, and I didn't get credit for it. And it's not really that I decided to fight back, but I just decided to be the best Julie that I could be. I decided that there was a premium associated with what I did. It wasn't a discount, it was a premium. But it happened in my brain. It didn't happen anywhere else, and it wasn't really because of anyone else. And so I'm really kind of sad and sorry to say that I think the problem is not misogyny, the problem is not discrimination. The problem, if there is one about misogyny or any other of these forms, is that women are complicit in it. I can only speak as a woman. People are complicit in the discrimination that they feel. We all start where we start. Can't change that. But you can decide whether or not you want to be complicit in the discrimination that you feel. I chose not to be. The fourth point I would make is that there are always unintended consequences of discrimination. And my favorite example of this is when I first moved to Paris when I was 21 years old. I found, to my great amusement, that there were people much older than I working at big institutions like Ernst & Young and all sorts of fancy banks and so forth when I was a lowly English teacher at age 21 in Paris, and they were getting, I kid you not, for living in Paris, hardship pay. They were getting hardship pay because Americans in those corporates didn't realize that you didn't need to pay them to go to Paris. So there were a bunch of very clever people who were saying, "We're really being discriminated against. Oh my God, we're having to pull the kids out of school. We're having to go to Paris. And could you pay me more money? Okay, sure, fine." And they're getting sent to Paris with an extra pay packet of this because it's really hard work to live in Paris. Right? There's always unintended consequences of doing that. The unintended consequences there was that American corporations who were sending their executives to Paris didn't have to pay the money. They could have sent a good group of people without that. There are other unintended consequences that have already been mentioned by Francesca about irritation factor. When discrimination happens, it breeds the opposite of harmony, people feeling positive, working together, and so forth. So finally, in conclusion, I think the reason why you should be voting for the position that we're arguing on our side, it is the position which respects the individual. It's a position which shows that it's actually your responsibility. Is there social injustice in the world? Of course there is. Should we allow governments to create policies to change this? Why should we? Why should we outsource that to the government? Why should we say that that's not our responsibility? Every single day we have opportunities to change the way the world works, to identify discrimination and decide that we're going to choose the best candidate when it's our decision. We have these opportunities, and the position that we're arguing is about respecting the individual, both ourselves as actors in the world and respecting the choices that other people have in the way that they conduct themselves in playing the mental game properly and being the master of the opportunities. And I would respectfully request for you to vote for our position. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julie. Now it's a pleasure to introduce the continued case for the opposition, Baroness Angela Smith. Baroness Smith is a Labour peer and was formerly a parliamentary parliamentary private secretary to Prime Minister Gordon Brown. She was also, while an MP, chosen on an all-woman shortlist and was Minister for Social Exclusion. Thank you, Max.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, if there is a point of agreement amongst us tonight, I think it is that we understand the impact of discrimination and the corrosive effect it can have. But it's not just about an individual, it's also about communities and sections of communities. And when people discriminate against, whether in employment, in education, in housing, in healthcare, it's got to be tackled and the principles of fairness and equity applied. And governments that represent society should challenge and at least try to mitigate the effect of discrimination. Because governments have a duty to protect not just the weak and the vulnerable, but the able, the talented, the healthy, because they have to get the best for their society. And that's for the individual benefit and for the benefit of society as a whole. And we talk about the meritocratic ideal, and it is an ideal, one I hope we all share, that people would be judged, as Martin Luther King said, on their abilities, on their character, not on the colour of their skin. You could have added by gender, by age, by religion, by disability. But where that is obviously not the case, where people are being discriminated against, action has to be taken to get as close as possible to some form of equity. We can call it positive discrimination, affirmative action, but it's the intention and the outcome of the act, rather than the act itself, that should be judged as being important. The first legislative example was an employment law. It was signed by President Kennedy in 1961, it was endorsed and then strengthened by President Johnson in 1965. It was Lyndon Johnson, President Johnson, who said, "You do not take a person who for years has been hobbled by chains and liberated, bring him to the starting line of a race and say, you're free to compete with the others." The United Nations also endorses the principle of taking action in favour of discriminated groups, and it says that such action may involve granting for a time to the part of the population concerned certain preferential treatment in specific matters as compared with the rest of the population. As long as such action is needed to correct discrimination, it is legitimate. So affirmative action, positive discrimination, it's only a tool. It's a mechanism, a temporary mechanism. It's not a goal or an achievement. It's a means to a better end. And as Jan said, for tonight's motion to be carried, it has to be proved that there are no circumstances in which it would be right for any form of discrimination to be used in favour of a disadvantaged section of society, even if it's used to address historic or institutional discrimination. So I want to give you 3 examples where I think society is better off because of some form of affirmative action. I'm not putting these on equal status, but I think they're all important. Now this is, as you mentioned, Chairman, Mr. President, in my bio notes, the person who'd been selected for the Women Shortlist for a Labour candidate in 1997. The 1997 general election, the Labour Party decided that in the seats it was most likely to win, half the candidates would be female and half would be male. Why? Well, since 1918, one woman first won a seat in Parliament, then another in 1919, then another in 1921. Only 168 women had ever been elected to the British House of Commons. And there wasn't a female member of the House of Lords until 1958. And in 1997, as a result of the policy, it was temporarily declared illegal by an industrial tribunal. 101 women were elected to Parliament, 65 of those for the first time. Does that matter? Is it important? Well, I contest that it is. Because if Parliament is to represent society, it has to better reflect society. It can't be an exact match, obviously. But we need to get to the point where age, colour, religion and gender are not the criteria upon which we judge an individual's suitability to legislate. It's hard now to think that people were saying back in 1997, it's not a suitable job for a woman. The first question I was asked by the media when I was elected was, what was my husband going to do when I was in London? Who would cook his dinner? Who would I spent 20 years of marriage to cook his dinner and iron his shirts? Now the question, there's huge interest in women MPs. What we wore, what we said, how we acted. No one now refers to women MPs. They're all just MPs. That's exactly as it should be. My second area to look at is a national one. Because many countries have affirmative action legislation to assist disadvantaged groups.
and I want to refer to one, and that's South Africa. The apartheid government in South Africa has specific legislation to discriminate in favour of white businesses and in favour of white employees, and against what they call blacks, colours and Indians. When black workers were cheaper to employ in the mines, the government they could get more of the jobs. The government then brought in new legislation that placed further restrictions on the rights of blacks to work. So it's clear that by design, not by accident, by design, that skin colour was the most important determinant in someone's life chances. So after the ANC won power in 1994, the new constitution, the new government, whilst remarkably egalitarian, particularly given the circumstances, they brought in affirmative action legislation in the fields of employment to ensure a more level playing field in job opportunities between white men, black men, women and people with disabilities. Now it's partly succeeded, but there is a legacy of apartheid, because the previous inferior education system for blacks, who were only able to access what's called bounty education, was designed to provide labourers, not office workers, not doctors, but labourers, means there are fewer non-whites that was well qualified, and now they're tapping the education system and have been since 1994. It will take some time to impact all those changes to become evident in all areas of employment. But I believe that government was right to tackle those false inequalities from the apartheid regime, and they used the best tools that they could. They used positive discrimination. It wasn't a choice for them, it was a necessity for the future, the economy, and the welfare of people in South Africa. My final example is from Northern Ireland. The historic Belfast Agreement of 1998 committed the government to setting up an independent commission on policing. And they had to look at future policing arrangements, including how to engage the community, how to get support for the community for policing in Northern Ireland. It was headed by former Conservative Government Minister Chris Patten. He made a number of recommendations. Now, some of those were controversial, they were difficult for people who supported them. One of those was recruitment to the police service of Northern Ireland, formerly the RUC. And this became known as 50-50 recruitment, because 50% of those recruited to the police service of Northern Ireland had to be Catholic. Why? Because at that point, only 8.3% of the police force in Northern Ireland was Catholic. So the measures came in as temporary measures in 2001. They lapsed this March because they were aiming for 30%. In November of last year, they reached 29.38% of PSI officers were Catholic. Now, it strains belief, doesn't it, that there wasn't some kind of institutional discrimination that made Catholics work for the police force. It wasn't just the police force, it wasn't just recruitment. There's also the case, I think some people in their own community persuaded them not to join. But if they hadn't introduced that policy, they wouldn't have got the extra police officers. Without those extra Catholic police officers, how would the community have policing, confidence in their policing, if it wasn't reflective of their community? And how could police and justice ever have been restored to the Northern Ireland Assembly, to local issues, to local politicians, if they hadn't had that kind of more balanced police force? So that policy, enshrined in statute of 50-50 recruitment, challenging as it was, as difficult as it was, really was essential to ensure those objectives as part of the Belfast Agreement. So, is it the case that no discrimination will be positive? My contention is not only that it can be positive, but it's a necessary tool. It's a necessary mechanism as a weapon in the fight against prejudice and discrimination. And if you can accept that one of those cases of positive discrimination made a positive difference, then you have to vote against tonight's motion.
Thank you very much, Baroness. Now it's your chance to have your say. The audience can make speeches on the floor of up to 1 minute. And speakers, if there's anything you particularly passionately disagree with, just let me know if you'd like a chance to come back. So can I have a speech in favour of a motion that is you don't believe any discrimination can be positive? and also give your name and college after, before you speak. Yes, Joe.
Joseph Sanderson, Jesus College. I want to ask you a question. Do you believe that it's right to exclude someone from a job or from a university because of their race or because of their gender? And if you answered yes to that question, I have to say that you're a racist or you're a sexist. And the reason is this. Things like racial quotas are wrong because they value race above the individual. You're not seeing a person as a person. You're seeing them as race X. And the people aren't interchangeable. And that's why affirmative action is wrong. It says that you get points for being of a particular race or for being of a particular sex. And what you should be doing is you should be looking at people's true potential. And yes, maybe look into people's potential more, but don't give them points for being of a desired sex or race. Don't create quotas where you only have a certain number of a particular race or whatever, because there's natural variation. Some people are better, some people are worse, and that is why you should judge based on the individual and not based on race or sex.
Does anyone disagree with that? Would like to make a point that some discrimination can be positive? Yes.
Francesca, College. I'd argue that what Joseph just said does actually sort of favour some form of discrimination, because what he was actually saying was you should look into someone's potential, not leave race to be the deciding factor in what their potential is, but look into it as a result. I'd take the example of this university as a place where positive discrimination can be positive. Now, in the application process, sometimes certain quotas are given for race or ethnic background, but I'd say that's because it already shows to an extent about a person from an ethnic minority. It shows something about them that they've been able to fight the stereotypes, fight the minority, and apply to somewhere like this. Now, if you say that there is no positive form of discrimination at all, then letting people in based on the fact that they're from a state school, perhaps when they've had to work harder for their exam results than for someone who's had it fed to them from a high-ranking private school, it possibly says more about them, the fact that they have managed to get the same exam results from a state school. And so discriminating based upon that is a positive thing. And if this university aims to be a meritocracy, i.e. letting the best people in suited upon the course that they are aiming for, then that is a positive form of discrimination.
Does anyone have a point in abstention of the motion? That is, you want to show up. Yes.
Ty Koch from Meyer College. I'm in two minds about this debate. Whilst I fundamentally agree with the motion, and frankly, the first time I ever heard you speak, it was on ageism in the Bedford Council chambers, and I agreed with you then, and I still agree with you today. And as part of my French A-level speech, which I had to write, which was about discrimination, I discovered that in France, they thought about introducing anonymous CVs, which I think would be a really good idea. On the other hand, I'm from Murray Edwards College, and I found myself on a formal hall swap a few weeks ago with some guys from another college, and they were saying, no, if we got rid of the girls, the all-women's colleges, and let men in, then other colleges would change their mind. And I pointed out that these particular guys were from Magdalen, and I said, you were the last college to let women in. You had a procession through Cambridge with a coffin. You were so upset about letting women in. The rest of the university needs to fundamentally change its ideas about women in academia before the all-women colleges can be made mixed. Thank you.
Do we have another speech in favour of the motion that no discrimination can be positive? Do you want to come back to that? Yes?
Yep. I just wanted to counter one of the arguments that was made in the second speech there, because I think it just perfectly shows the unintended consequences of discrimination. And I'll preface it by saying that Nelson Mandela is, without question, one of the most extraordinary individuals that's ever walked the face of the planet. We have a number of South Africans on our team at Ariadne Capital, and the real reality on the ground in South Africa today is that whites can't get jobs. And so, what are they doing? They're either leaving, but more importantly, when they are in South Africa, they're becoming entrepreneurs, creating wealth for themselves and the economy, not working for other people. And because of that, they're creating wealth, and the blacks are thinking that they've won the game and are getting some of the top jobs due to these discriminatory measures, and apparently it's really quite stacked against them. A number of people have said that if you're a white male, don't even try to apply, just set up your own business. The point is, what started off as a very good measure to try to equalize society, to make it more fair and so forth, is actually inadvertently is hurting the very people that it was trying to help, because entrepreneurship is the big megatrend. The people who are building businesses today are actually positioning themselves very well for creating wealth for themselves and society. So I think, with all due respect, I think that as one of the cases that the other side presented perfectly illustrates the unintended consequences of discrimination.
Does anyone dispute? Do you have another speech in opposition to the motion? Yes, and then just very quickly.
Very quickly. Can't let that go, can I? I have to say, I think that says more about the economy in South Africa. A lot of people in South Africa haven't got jobs, but you can't get away from the fact that institutionalised legislation that legislated against blacks, Indians and colours having jobs has to be addressed. That can only be addressed by legislation. Of course, there will be some white men who won't have got the jobs that they would have got under the apartheid regime. Things have changed. What matters and what they're trying to get, and what they're desperately trying to do, is that the judgment won't be on colour, but on ability. They've got a long way to go, but at least they're trying.
Well, another speech in opposition. I think we've got the students. So yes, the lady over there.
Emmanuel College. What the second proposition speaker said in her initial speech, I fundamentally disagree with. This idea of the mind game that we all play. It's assuming we're independent agents, which we're really not. Your example of your teacher who discriminated against you and you decided not to be discriminated against anymore, wonderful, but the problem was not with you, it was the person who was discriminating against you. And you shouldn't have to be exceptional to get respect. You should just be an individual and get respect.
Can I have a final speech then in proposition of the motion that no discrimination can be positive? Yes.
Sorry, Catherine Washington, Wolston College. I'm a lesbian with multiple disabilities. I'm a mature student and I'm the daughter of an immigrant. And I tick all but one, I think, of the little boxes that people would use for positive discrimination. I applied to one college and actually I got called and put into Wolston, and for me what made me so proud of getting accepted into Cambridge was the fact that Wolston didn't see my Cambridge Special Access Scheme form. It didn't see all the tick boxes that I ticked, it just took me on what I consider to be the only relevant criteria, which was my academic potential. I think that what we've neglected to mention is the fact that while it's horrible to know that you can't get somewhere or do something because of something which someone might discriminate against you for, it's just as bad to know or to think maybe you're only here because you tick a box. And I think, yeah, please vote for the motion.
Thank you. Do we have then one final speech to close off the floor speeches in abstention of the motion? So, yes.
Angus Morrison, Christ College. I don't think you can actually come up with an opinion on this debate without just becoming embroiled in pedantry. On one hand, I believe that the tick box culture, if you get more points for being of a certain ethnicity, that is fundamentally wrong. That is not positive discrimination. On the other hand, by recognizing a person as an individual, as different from another, that is discrimination in itself. So I physically cannot make a decision on this debate and will abstain.
I'm just told in the interest of fairness I should make one more point, allow one more point in opposition of the motion. Does anyone else have anything? Yes. Yes.
Dominic Raab, Wilson College. I think it's important for us to understand that why this positive discrimination against race, sex, gender, and all of that happening is because historically speaking, these people have been discriminated in some way, some form or the other. That's why they're in a disadvantaged position today. So I think we have to take that into account. And so because of those historical reasons, they are not in a level playing field as we speak to compete in the world. Whether that is in academia or entertainment or politics. So I think we need to think about the history and the discrimination they have faced historically.
Now it's a pleasure to introduce, to conclude the debate for the proposition, Dominic Raab MP, who is a recently elected Conservative MP and was formerly an international lawyer at the Foreign Office. Thank you.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. 45 years ago today, Nelson Mandela was shipped out to Robben Island to serve a life sentence. He told the court he was prepared to die for the ideal of a society based on equal opportunity. His words. Last November, University of Cape Town professor Neville Alexander, who spent a decade with Mandela on Robben Island, said he railed against plans for introduction of racial benchmarks in university admissions. He said, the government under apartheid did the same. We told them to go to hell. If ever there was a historic case for positive discrimination, it would be South Africa. Wherever it has been tried, it has proved bitterly divisive for a very simple reason. Two wrongs don't make a right. My father was a refugee to this country from the worst persecution and discrimination imaginable. He was a Czech Jew. He married my mum, an English Protestant. I married a Brazilian Catholic. When we have children, I've got no idea which box they should tick on the diversity questionnaire. I'll be honest with you, I hope they'll have scrapped them by then, because I want my children to grow up in a meritocratic society where they're judged as individuals, blind to race, religion, sexuality or gender. And I think if we're going to prize equality, and I genuinely think across the House that's what we want to do, we've got to start treating it like a value, not a bandwagon. And that means applying it consistently. There aren't two types of discrimination on arbitrary social criteria, good, bad, positive discrimination. They're both wrong, on principle, counterproductive, in practice. And as a new MP, I thought that what I could offer this debate is just to give you insights from the House of Commons in terms of the legislative process, and in particular, the creeping, and I regard it as an unhealthy, consensus in favour of positive discrimination. And I want to give three examples, both practical examples. They're legislative hangovers from the last Equality Act, which the new government has had to think about. The first one is the draft regulations, still under consultation, which would require 27,000 schools, police forces, councils, and other public bodies to audit their staff on grounds of ethnicity, gender reassignment, sexuality, disability, religion, even their political beliefs. That's in there. Now, and the intention is so that they can be judged how well they're promoting minority groups. Now, I think it's pretty Orwellian for any employer to be asking their staff that kind of very personal, intrusive information. But I also think, just at a practical level, my council's got better things to be doing than counting the number of Protestants, Presbyterians, Pentecostals, let alone pagans and post-Marxist progressives. My voters, they just want the bins collected on time. And I think it's when you start to look through not just the principled arguments, but the practical implications, the law of unintended consequences, that we really get to grips with what this is all about. After all, once your staff have filled in this diversity audit, what do they do next? How do you know the optimum social mix for a council in Cornwall or a police force up in Yorkshire? You need benchmarks or social quotas. But what should they be indexed to? The national population, the local community, or the professional sector? How do you make it work in practice? And I think the minute you start probing, you raise a much bigger issue. Do we really want our society carved up into these types of arbitrary and artificial social categories? Now, the second example I want to give is around the whole debate about gender quotas. And Jan very helpfully quoted a very selected part of an article I wrote. But I make no apology. I'm fed up with the militant agenda that belittles the progress in our society towards a more tolerant society. We have made progress. Let's acknowledge it. Let's celebrate it. Of course, there are still social creases in Britain today. I don't think anyone, and I certainly have never doubted that for a second. But let's also remember the gender pay gap has halved since the 70s. On the latest ONS figures, median full-time earnings, men earn 10% more than women. But that looks much less about endemic or institutional discrimination, and much more like the challenge that many women that I know in my generation have combining career and family. If it was prejudice, why do the ONS figures show that women in their 20s earn 2% more than men? If it was prejudice, why does other research demonstrate that women who are separated, divorced or widowed earn a shade more than their male counterparts? Now, look, sure, we don't have nearly enough women on FTSE 100 boards. I agree with that. But let's also recognise that the number has doubled in the last 10 years. Not quickly enough, but it's doubled, so there's progress. Let's remember that in my party, the number of female MPs trebled at the last election. And half the very top posts in the civil service today are now held by women. Sure, we need even more progress. I couldn't agree with that more. But the answer isn't the quick fix of anti-meritocratic quotas. I've lost count of the number of women who have told me they find them insulting and patronising. But that's not actually the core root issue. The fact is they just won't deal with the problem. We need much less of this outdated 60s gender warfare that pits couples against each other in this very outdated battle of the sexes. We need far more family-friendly policies. I'm a supporter of transferable parental leave, so that couples can decide how they share between them the responsibilities of being the breadwinner and the child carer. After all, that is a common challenge that most couples go through together. And by the way, since no one else has said it, I don't think we should be belittling any man or any woman who decides they want to stay home to look after the family because as a matter of their values, that's just more important. Now, the third example I just want to give finally is the gradual surreptitious introduction of positive discrimination into recruitment. One of the first cases I had as a new MP was a young guy who wrote to me, pretty devastated, it has to be said. He'd applied for work experience at the Foreign Office. There are 3 schemes, and he was not even allowed to apply. He was barred from applying because he's white, male, middle class. Similar schemes, similar bars are in place in other civil service schemes and in the Metropolitan Police. Let's be very clear about our values. I think that's morally wrong, socially divisive, and by the way, a gift to the BNP. But the Equality Act goes further, and this is the most obnoxious element in my view. Firms are now allowed to interview, when they interview several more or less equally qualified candidates on paper, they're now allowed to make diversity the decisive factor. How many here knew that that provision of law entered into force in April of this year, I wonder? Quietly, not too much fuss. No one really wanted to talk about it. Not so much democratic scrutiny there for such a progressive measure. Let's think through the logical implications. When you all leave university after all of that hard work you're putting in, when you get that job of your dreams, or you get that interview for the job of your dreams, it may not be decided on your talent or your ability, but on some arbitrary social quotas. There's a good recent example of this, a woman called Kat Akimbade. She won her top Channel 4 job as a TV presenter, her dream job. About the week afterwards, her boss told her that she was picked because she was black. He told her in a really nice way. She gave an interview with The Independent on Sunday, and I don't want to be accused, as politicians are wont, of spinning. So I'll give you the accurate quote from the article online. Positive discrimination robs an individual of drive and self-motivation. It completely undermines the achievements of the hard-working and the truly gifted. Is that the kind of society we all want? It gets worse. The Equality Act is not just promoting diversity of ethnicity or religious beliefs, it is also now apparently going to promote diversity of political beliefs. I mean, just think this through. When multinationals come down and do their graduate recruitment drive in Cambridge, the big companies, let's say McKinsey, presumably they've got to have their fair share of Trotskyites and anarchists. Or what about The Guardian? Maybe they've got to have a quota of Thatcherites. I don't know if I feel sorry for more. But let's again not just address this on principle, let's think about the practical implications. How do firms know when they have the right mix? Well, the bureaucrats have produced a guide. And what they say is that employers don't even need any statistical data, no empirical evidence at all. Shows you how seriously we're taking this. All they have to do is a boss has to get their existing staff together and ask them, which groups do you feel are underrepresented? I've got this picture of David Brent at Werner Hock getting all of his team together and saying, so which minorities are you all excluding? I mean, it's just dark, but it's worse than dark, it's divisive. Not the society, not the kind of society I want for my children, not the kind of society I want for you. I want a society where you're all treated as individuals. I want a society where the only thing we discriminate on is talent and hard work. And I want a society, in the words of the great Martin Luther King, where you're judged on the content of your character, nothing more, nothing less. I commend this motion to the House.
Thank you very much, Dominic. And now it's a pleasure to introduce, to round off the debate as a whole, Baroness Esher, who is Professor of Politics and Women's Studies at York University and first Iranian woman to sit in the House of Lords. Baroness Esher.
It's always a great privilege to end a debate, because you actually have to look at everybody's argument and see where it sits. Now, what really interested me is the argument against positive discrimination, ticking boxes, etc., was more or less, look, it's working, let's keep it going, and don't intimidate or don't make it divisive. Now, I happen to be a token woman. I was when I came to Cambridge, for every one woman, there were 12 boys. So I had a fantastic time. I did all the A-boys. I actually found competition was jolly good for the men. They absolutely enjoyed it. There was nothing of animosity about it, because I was also a fierce feminist. And they knew it. And they actually thought it was quite fun to see how other people thought. I mean, after all, this is a place for intellectual gymnastics. Come on! If you don't start thinking that we should change it, and we should think about why is it that it's like this? Why is it that we need equality bills? If it's all so wonderful, why did we need to have change? Now, I loved Frankie's ideas. She said it's all bad, but we can do better. But I think what we need to do is to analyze what is bad and what is the problem. And again, I've heard, well, okay, the problem with women is they want to raise their children. And of course, if they raise their children, then they can't be in the workplace. And I think the most interesting example of that was Alan Sugar speaking in the debate on women in the House of Lords and saying, well, I don't know why people think I'm terrible about women. Of course, I employ women in all sorts of things, but I first asked them, what are your arrangements for your children? It never occurred to him that he never asks the men, what are your arrangements about the children? After all, it takes two to tango. The kids didn't just come. You know, they were made by somebody. And the idea that somehow it's women who should work flexibly, who should do things the way in this man-made world, where we have to be part of the manpower. If we want to get any job, we have to be better than the men. So let's not just pretend that it's about equality, because men like chaps like themselves, You know, it's quite nice to be able to discuss things in the pub or in the loo or wherever it is that men use their you know, and I can't get in there. And actually one of the nicest things about women getting to the House of Lords is that they actually took the best loo and made it women's loo. And I still have members of the House of Lords who say, oh, terrible, you took over. But somehow, it seems it actually makes a point. It actually makes the point that what you can do, we can do better. And in the world that we have been raised, we have had to do better than the men to actually get in. And now, the we that I'm talking about is us. We are privileged, we are educated, and we have the social capital. So that if a bloke tells me what he thinks, I don't ever go the stage that Julia went on, which she was silent. I've always said, oh, stop it, mate. And it's worked. Because when I went to school, I had elocution lessons. So I speak the right kind of English. I didn't know a word of English, but I always thought English was French when I first came here. But anyway. But if you have the wherewithals to make up your mind, to reflect your mind, to present yourself, then of course you can do well. But what I think is crucial, and what women do far better than men, is to actually explode the silences. The silences about the time of women. We find women as a category doing domestic work, care work, health work. And we find the worst paid jobs as a category, the kind of jobs that women do. And there is nothing so de-skilling in the labour market as motherhood. You get a baby, and everybody assumes your brain has gone on holiday, and that there is no way that you can actually work and childcare. And so you have the whole problem of working mothers, not fathers, who are blamed for latchkey children, for their children being unruly. The whole responsibility of production and reproduction are on working women. And if they fail, the next generation has failed. Now, it seems to me extraordinary that we don't see the disparities. And if you look at historically, the only time that the role of women has been highlighted has been by women in Parliament. The first person to transfer a bit of money from the wallet to the purse was Barbara Castle, who actually said, come on, after all, we are saying women are child carers, let's give the child benefit to women. When I first started working in this country, I have never taken my husband's name. I worked in a different town from my husband's. And I was paying super tax because I had said I was married. And they couldn't find a man to whom they were going to pay the bit of my taxation, which was due to him. Because, of course, he was the man, he was the breadwinner. It was because women fought. It was because we were horrible. It was because we stood up for our rights, not just quietly in meetings, but everywhere, that we are beginning to move towards equality. It doesn't happen. The system doesn't change without a fight. You really have to be there, and you really have to fight. And actually, in my experience, men respect women who are good fighters. And so there is no divisiveness. I have fought on the question of race, I have fought on the question of gender, and now that I'm becoming a little old lady, I'm jolly well fighting on the question of age. So let's not have all this discrimination, that there comes a point, because of your colour, because of your creed, because of your gender, you are categorized as not suitable. When we say no discrimination, do you think that all these employers who employ people exactly like themselves are not discriminating? They are employing people who they recognize, they can work with, they speak the same language, and they can get on. And they don't work troublemakers. But as a lifetime troublemaker, I can tell you, unless you fight for rights, you can't get there. And the idea presented across the debate that of course this is wrong and this is wrong and this is how I did it. I put my mind over it. Or I did this or I did that. It may work for individuals who have the culture, the class, the social capital, but it doesn't work for cases, as was cited here, of kids whose teachers have told them they're stupid from the very beginning. So I actually think we need to have women in positions of power. We need to have minorities. Okay, you don't like the division by religion. You don't have to actually say what your religion is. But if you live in the current climate of Islamophobia, and you have a Muslim name, or you say that you're a Muslim, you ain't going to get a job. So, are we going to do nothing about it and say, oh, well, the media has decided that there's a whole category of citizens who are baddies, so we're not going to have anything to do with that. It seems to me that if we actually take an analysis of the labour market, if we look at the divide that there is in the income generation ability of men and women, if we look at the way that women, when women enter a profession, it's devalued, then we will actually see that the best way forward is to fight for the minorities, for those who are discriminated against, for those who are alienated, because you never know. You might accidentally find yourself in that category. You might not change colour, but you would change class sometimes. And without the sense of solidarity and support, and particularly for women, without a solid sisterhood, we ain't going to get anywhere. They ain't going to give it to us. We got to take it. Thank you.
Tickets to the garden party, you haven't picked them up, and tomorrow is the last day to do so in the office between 9 and 5. Secondly, because it's the last debate term, the bars open especially late till 1 a.m. with some extra drink deals and live music. Please do this. And could you all please join me again in thanking the speakers for coming.